All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on child safety. My name is Joshua, and I'm the Church Windows representative and webinar facilitator for today's webinar event. I am not the presenter for the event today, and before we do turn things over to our presenters, our presenters at KidCheck, we'd like to go over a few technical details. It should only take a minute or two here before we can do that, and then I'll be happy to switch that over to them. First, I know a lot of our folks are used to webinars, based on our normal 20-minute time length or format, what have you, and we just want to remind folks today that today's webinar event is scheduled for a full hour and not the typical 20 minutes. If that was unclear or you're unable to stay for the entire event, we will be making available a recording of today's event on our YouTube channel as soon as possible. Could be between now and the end of this week. It may be next week at some point, but we will make a recording available for you. Second, if this is the first webinar event you've attended, please click the little red arrow on the sidebar of your webinar control panel to minimize it and get the full complete visual effect of the presentation. Or if you've got a dual monitor set up, just drag that control panel off to your second desktop, just to get it out of the way so you can see the full screen. Third, attendees are, of course, muted and unable to ask questions out loud during the webinar events. That's just, again, because there would be a lot of white noise in the background and what have you. But we still encourage you to have questions. To enter questions if you have those. If you do have questions, please enter or type those in the questions portion or pane of the webinar control panel. And there are representatives or folks standing by ready to respond to questions at any point during the webinar event. So please, as a question comes up, you don't have to wait till the end of the webinar to enter those. Somebody is monitoring those questions, and so please type those in or enter those as they come up for you. Okay? All right. So finally, we'd like to say that we here at Church Windows are so delighted and thrilled to be presenting today's webinar with our most recent partner, KidCheck. Of course, protection of our children is of utmost importance, and we're very pleased that the experts at KidCheck are willing to share their knowledge and wisdom and expertise with us today. So, without further delay, let me turn things over to Alex Smith, and let me get that all taken care of. And over to Alex. There you go, Alex. It should be in your hands, and I'll let you introduce your folks from there.
That was great. Thank you so much, Joshua. I really appreciate the introduction, and good morning, everybody, or good afternoon.
Yeah, hello.
So I'm Alex Smith. I'm the CEO of KidCheck, and I'm here today with Angela Lewton, who is our resident child safety expert, as well as our blogging queen and the social media maven. So we're just really happy to be here, and thanks for letting us share a topic that's really close to our hearts and something that is really, really important to us, especially within children's ministry specifically. So we've got a lot of stuff to cover, but before we start jumping into the presentation, let me just say a really heartfelt thank you to everybody who is a children's pastor. I know we've got some other pastoral staff as well, but specifically children's pastors. I just want to say thank you for all of the hard work. It is a tireless job to continue to provide for the spiritual growth of our kids. I've got 5 kids personally, so I really thank you so much.
We really thank you for that.
Angela's got 2 as well, and so we're kind of coming at this presentation from not only the parent perspective, but also a child safety and child safety experts perspective. But thank you so much for all the hard work and effort that you put into the children that you care for. I know that from a church standpoint, we do a lot to try and prepare children's pastors and pastoral staff for ministry and making sure that we're taking care of the spiritual maturity of the young ones. But safety and security is often an overlooked topic. But that's one of the things that we kind of are expecting to have happen in church, right? So this is probably my favorite webinar just because it's such an important topic to talk about, something that's close to our hearts, but also just good practical information to kind of go through.
And I think one of the things we've seen in statistics is that even in seminary, less than 1% of the information shared has to do with child safety and security. And so this is really important if you're a seasoned pastor of 30 years or you're someone who's just recently stepped out of seminary and is in a new role. This information is vitally important, and we hope that it will help you to do to make it easy to watch over the children.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and start our information here. And hopefully everybody can see my screen there. Okay.
So in this first slide, we want to talk about, throughout the presentation, we'll discuss becoming safety-minded. And that's really important because, you know, being safety-minded is a big part of what children's ministry directors do. And in this slide, what we want to do is just highlight for you the 8 top elements of what you need to be considering when you're thinking about becoming safety-minded. You can see within the light bulb there's abuse prevention, policy, training, incident management, facilities, check-in and check-out, and abuse prevention. And so those are really the top 8 elements that you want to keep in the back of your mind and that we'll be mentioning throughout this presentation. As you can see over the light bulb, the very top thing is ministry mission. We feel like becoming safety-minded should be really integrated within your ministry mission. And that establishes it as a top priority. It helps people to understand that no matter what you're doing, that's always in the forefront of your mind. And in addition to that, there's some other categories to help you sort of keep this at the forefront and push this out into your overall organization. We talk about accountability, and you know, really we want to have you increase accountability. So putting more eyes on situations. We want people to understand that if safety is a priority, accountability is equally as important. The other thing is communication. You always want to be talking about it, why it's important, why you as a children's ministry director think it's a top priority. You always want to be talking about that, communicating out. And then the next thing is involvement. It's really important that you gain buy-in from those on a board or those who are your staff, your volunteers. It's really everybody needs to be involved in helping to keep children safe. And so that involvement is a huge piece. And then finally, reviewing your progress. How has this affected your ministry? Has it decreased incidents? Has it increased parental perception? Have you, just some of the data that you'll capture as you start to roll out things that are more having to do with child safety and security. So being safety-minded, these are the top things that we think about and that we'll cover today throughout the presentation.
And Angela, I know that, like, as you've talked about in other webinars and seminars that you've done, and you have a key phrase that you use frequently that I think is just one of the absolute pinnacles of being safety-minded, and as well as just making sure that you have a secure and safe environment, which is you always want to increase accountability and reduce isolation.
Correct.
And that's going to be a theme that we're going to go through kind of throughout the entire presentation today. Is everything we're doing is focused on increasing accountability within the staff, within your volunteers, within every aspect of anybody that is going to be part of your ministry, and reducing isolation so that you make sure that you've got lots of eyes on what's going on and lots of points of accountability.
Yes. If you take away one thing from our presentation today, that would absolutely be it, that increasing accountability and decreasing isolation. Yeah.
So let's start off with one slide. This is kind of the it paints a pretty negative picture about the world, really. This is a kind of a troubling statistical slide, and we don't share this with you to try and disturb you, but it's just kind of a picture of the landscape that we are all in. In church, we are certainly not isolated from from sin and predators and kind of the state of the world. So these are some very kind of troubling things. A couple, I just want to point out a couple. The first one is that by the time a child is 18, 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 4 boys will be sexually assaulted. That's huge.
It's heartbreaking.
It is amazing. If you think about the number of kids that you have in your children's ministry, that's a large number of kids.
Absolutely.
And so, are we doing everything we can to make sure that church is truly a safe environment and a safe place? The other one is that I was kind of amazed by. That very last statistic was that over 80% of child abuse victims know their abuser.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. I mean, that's just kind of talks to how these predators sort of work their way into the system.
Well, I think in times past, organizations have always focused on stranger danger, but now we know that that's important information to have, but it doesn't really speak to the whole picture.
Right.
You know, I think throughout the presentation, you'll also hear us reference safe adults. Those are individuals who children know, who they're comfortable with, who they often trust, who their families trust. And so now, when we're talking about abuse prevention, there's really more of an emphasis put on the safe adult because of numbers and statistics like that.
That makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about some practical things that you can do right now as a children's pastor or a pastor on staff to help improve the security and safety within your children's ministry. And there's some very practical things that you can do immediately.
Absolutely.
One is, we do this seminar all over the country, and it's amazing to see the growth in security teams within churches. And this is just a really, really practical, easy step. I actually have a background in law enforcement, and for me, when I moved to Boise, Idaho here, the church that I joined up, I was asked to be on the security team just because of that background. And I was so excited because it's like, hey, here's an opportunity to use the skills and the training that I had been given over the course of years to actually do something practical and something really, really needed within the church. And Angela, I know you currently serve on your security team at your church as well.
Yes, and you're right when you say that there are always lots of individuals within the congregation or church community that would be willing to step up and help by using those gifts.
Yeah.
And I'm always amazed. Our church security team is such a diverse group of individuals. We have retired law enforcement, we have FBI, we have, those who work in, local police forces, first responder type people. I mean, it's just a really collective group, but they're all willing to step forward and help out where needed.
And these are guys that have, the heart to serve and, that have the skill set and training to really help out. So you don't think of yourself as having to be the security and safety expert on pastoral staff. There are people in your church that are safety and security experts. Go leverage their experience in practical ways. Now there are definitely right ways and wrong ways to do this.
Yeah.
So only about 30% of churches in the United States today have security teams. So we've seen that grow, from probably 10% when we started doing this webinar just a few years ago. But there's definitely right ways and wrong ways to do this. So the one thing that you don't want to do is you don't ever want to advertise in your bulletin for, hey, we're looking for security team members or somebody to head the security team. And the reason for that is you're going to have these folks are going to show up. These are, the armchair quarterbacks that, they've got a gun. They think they want to be Rambo on the weekends, and it's absolutely the wrong way to go ahead and build your security team. The right way to do it is you want to find a trusted law enforcement professional, somebody who understands the law, understands what the strategy is of the church, and understands that it's not, when you're in church, it's not protect and serve, it's serve and protect. And that's a really important distinction. So I have your church staff or your pastor identify one person that would be willing to head that ministry, that's got the right heart, and then let them build a team. Let them find out, okay, who are the people in the church that I know that have also the right heart, that have the background that I'm looking for, and let them kind of handpick the security team.
And let's talk about the size of the security team. Because I think sometimes when people hear team, they think 10, 15, 20 individuals. But the size of your security team is really going to be relative to how large your community is, or how many people are in attendance. So, if you have less than 50 people, you're really probably not going to need a team of 10.
No, you may have one or two people in a smaller church like that. And in fact, if your church is just starting up, if you're in a church plant or a very, very small church, the first step is just to connect with your local law enforcement agency, your local police department. Let them know what you're doing. Let them know, hey, I would really like to get any tips and tricks, and make sure that you've got phone numbers on speed dial so that you can get a hold of somebody if you need to. And a lot of times, local law enforcement loves that. Especially Sunday mornings are usually pretty slow, for a police department. So sometimes they can send a unit by just to kind of drive through the parking lot, and provide that overall presence that hey, we're partnered up or connected. But then as the church grows, it makes it easier to establish that security team by finding that trusted individual and let them add the right number of people based on the need. It's going to be based on the facility, how many times you meet, how big the congregation is, and go from there.
You've mentioned this in past presentations, but you've often highlighted the importance of getting to know your local resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that is a brilliant way to say it, because those local resources are really there to help people, and they're really open to helping people from what we see.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah, in fact, that most police departments that you know, some ones that I've worked in, and as well as the ones that I've known, are just very, very happy when the community is willing to step up and say, hey, we recognize the value that you provide, and you know, we want to partner up to make this a safer place.
Yeah.
So they're often very, very willing to help out.
That's great. So know your local resources. I have to keep that in mind.
So as your church is going and you establish a security team, if you're in children's ministry, one of the most important things that you need to do is to get to know who's on that team personally. Know their names, you know, establish a connection with them, because if there's any kind of incident, whether it is you know, everything from an angry parent to, you know, the full-on active shooter scenario, you know, they're your number one go-to anytime there's an incident. You don't have to be you know, you don't have to stand in the gap and get chewed out by some parent that's got some kind of custody situation going on, or whatever it is. You know, especially, you know, most pastors aren't wired for conflict like that.
Right.
But a law enforcement officer that is in your church community is. I mean, we're trained to handle
Trained
that.
to do that, and they're a good buffer.
Right. So make sure you've got good equipment with good radios. You know how to use it. That you've got one, you know, for yourself, and that you can just call and have a code. Just say like, hey, I've got a code 1 at the front door, and the team would know how to respond to that, and they can kind of come over and diffuse the situation very, very quickly. So highly recommend looking into security teams. There's a ton of great information on the web as well on how to do this. And one of my favorite, this is another partner company of ours called CPPS, and that is the Center for Personal Protection and Safety. And these guys do security training for everything from churches to universities to you know, the federal government.
Right.
These guys are former military,
Right.
and so they understand you know, all of the psychological pieces of security as well as all the practical pieces of security, and they actually have a whole division that is just for church security teams. So their website is at the bottom there. It's cppssite.com.
And they have some great information out there. I really always like their videos.
Yeah, great
They
training
do
videos.
great training videos, and they're accessible by anyone going to their website. So they're really, really helpful. They provide so much good information.
Right. So if there's one thing that you can do right now to help establish better safety and security on a very practical level, this is probably one of the simplest things to do. Just to go ahead and start building that security team. You know, they don't have to be in uniforms, and they can be undercover, and you know, however you want that to be perceived. But having those trusted individuals that have been trained, that know how to respond, you know, is just a huge, huge thing for you.
Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about facilities for a couple of minutes. And I just want to start by totally recognizing that, you know, the facilities that we meet in as a church aren't always totally practical. You know, a lot of times these are buildings that are used for other purposes, or buildings that we just didn't have much of a choice in. In fact, the church that I started attending on the security team, we met in an old movie theater. So it was, you know, probably the least practical from a security standpoint. But there are things that you can do to help improve security by looking at how your facilities are laid out. So one of the first things to talk about is, you know, sort of the traditional church setup in the past has been, hey, we want to put the children's ministry kind of far in the back, because the kids can be noisy, they can be distracting to what's happening in the actual sanctuary, and so it's you know, that pushing the children's ministry further away from where all the eyeballs are. But when you look at kind of the model for security, that we want to increase accountability and reduce isolation, that's really the wrong thing to do. We want to make sure that our classrooms are located in as highly visible area as we possibly can have. So my church, again, when we bought our first facility, the nursery was actually directly across the foyer from the main entrances to the actual sanctuary itself.
Interesting.
So pretty much everybody in the church walked right by there. There were like every eyeball in the church was in front of those doors. Excuse me. And that worked extremely well from a security standpoint. So you want to be thinking about that if you have the option to move classrooms, or just kind of looking at your facility layout. Hey, is there a better way that I can move these so that we can get better visibility or change the traffic flow, or kind of just investigating it from that standpoint.
And were there any tools or things that you used to sort of manage that traffic flow, or to keep a presence with the children's ministry, but also to put up maybe a barrier or something?
Actually, I've got a couple of pictures here. So a couple of things that we did when the service started, we actually used the belted stanchions, and these are very inexpensive. They're about $50 for a pair on Amazon. But we would put up the belted stanchions in front of the nursery area once the service started, and that was great from a security team standpoint. In that, when somebody was on the wrong side of the barrier, it was very apparent that, hey, you're in the wrong place, and it just prompted one of us to kind of go over and ask, hey, can we help? Is there something that that you need? So it provided, again, we still had lots of eyeballs on what was going on, but it provided that additional, kind of a mental barrier more than anything else, in terms of, hey, if this person's in the wrong place, we need to make sure that we act.
It's easily visible.
Yes.
If they're not where they should.
We actually had an incident. This is we were probably 2 or 3 years into this facility. We had an incident where a couple came out of the service, and the husband stood on the right side of the stanchion, and the wife went under the stanchions and into one of the nursery rooms and started telling the nursery worker about how she would love to have kids and wasn't able to, and oh my goodness, your babies are so cute, and can I hold one? So the nursery worker handed her a child from the nursery, and then she started making gestures about, like, well, can my husband hold it? And she was going to take the child over to let the husband hold it.
Wow.
And fortunately, the nursery worker had kind of the hair on her neck sort of stood up, and she said no, and she took the child back. And the couple immediately left the facility, and the nursery worker called the security team over. And as the security team, we were talking to other security teams at other churches, and apparently this couple had tried at several different churches to become isolated with a child, whether they were going to try kidnap somebody or whatever, who knows.
Wow.
But it was what was potentially a really big security risk. But because we had the stanchion set up, we had kind of layers of security in there. The security team was ready to go. We were able to respond almost immediately to
it can certainly happen anywhere, can it?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things to think about. So in looking at trying to reduce that isolation and increase visibility in your facilities, if your classrooms don't have windows, try keeping the doors open. And if you have the nursery with the kind of the escape artists in there,
They all are.
They all are. Yeah, use a child gate in front of there to make sure that you can kind of contain the classroom. But again, more eyeballs into what's actually happening. And then make sure that you've got the right volunteer ratio set up. So if you don't have a check-in system that can do this, there's different options to check out, but make sure you're not letting parents check kids into classrooms with no volunteers or that's understaffed.
Right.
Start thinking about combining classrooms together, so you've got at least 2 adults and 2 children together at any time.
That's great.
So make sure that you're looking at the entry points of your children's area, so that you can kind of control that traffic flow. Again, if you've got a check-in system that has some kind of an ID badge, system to double check that parents are authorized to be back there, it's a great thing. But you want to make sure that you've got that access set up and limited. And then just make sure that you're looking through your facilities, kind of with the worst-case scenario in your mind, and then just start applying common sense to. Okay, how are we going to handle different situations, and make sure that again, we've got great visibility into what's going on, but limited access to just those that should be there.
Oh, that's great. Those are great points. Because, especially what I like about this is on the facility side, we talk with a lot of people who are in rented facilities. So like you were saying with the movie theater, not ideal locations, but there are always things that you can do to sort of help increase that safety.
Absolutely. In fact, even like the movable wall idea, you can get a couple of panels and those all bolt together, so that you can take a large room and then split that back up into smaller areas, or provide access corridors, or however you need to set that up. But there's tools out there to help kind of mold your facility without making any kind of permanent changes.
Right.
So definitely.
Right. That's great.
Okay, this is my favorite slide in the entire presentation. So let's talk about medical emergencies for just a second, and I'm going to tell my quick story here. So this young man that you see over here on the right of the screen, that's actually my son. So he's a very rambunctious 13-year-old now, but this was back when he was I think he was 6 at this time, You notice he has a big goose egg right between his eyes.
That's huge. I can't believe he didn't like split his head completely open.
I'm absolutely amazed as well.
Wow.
And then this is the picture on the left there. That's the pole. That is the only pole that is in the entire children's ministry area, and it has actually, I think it took more damage than my son's forehead.
Oh my
but my son was he was running full speed in this room and ran right into that pole. I think he must have been looking away and then just turned that last second and just hit it.
That big goose egg just makes me hurt looking at it.
Man. So I was working on the security team. I was in the sanctuary. They called me out for a non-emergency. So we had little radios and all that stuff. And so I came out and we had a pretty good laugh after the tears were gone. So he hit the pole, and the lesson learned out of this that was kind of frustrating for me was that nobody had any idea where the first aid kit was. So we were very fortunate that it didn't split his head open, but because if it had, we would have had a big problem on hand trying to clean this all up. So, if you're thinking about medical emergencies within your children's ministry area, make sure that you have a first aid kit first of all, but make sure that everybody knows where it is and clearly mark it. We actually came to find out later on that the first aid kit was in a filing cabinet in the kindergarten classroom. It was just kind of stuffed in the back corner. Nobody had any idea that it was there. It just got thrown in this cabinet.
And I think that's pretty common. I mean, I think a lot of ministries that's the one detail that may not be at the forefront.
Yeah. And
they just don't know where their first aid kit is.
And a lot of times too, it's kind of a forgotten thing, right? Because it's you use supplies out of it periodically. Yeah. But hey, if it's been a couple of years, has anybody checked it to make sure that it's restocked and that expiration dates are good? When you're looking at marking it, these are some more signs that I found on Amazon. I think it was like $6 or $7 for a first aid kit sign like that. And so it'd be easy to put that on the wall and then teach your volunteers, hey, there's the first aid kit, in case you have some kind of medical emergency.
And if you're interested in knowing what should be in a first aid kit, we do have a post on our blog that outlines everything that should be within your first aid kit. And it's pretty straightforward, but sometimes people are like, now what should I include and what should I put here? And so there's good information out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Check out the KidCheck blog on our site, KidCheck.
Yeah, lots of good information.
So make sure, if you're using a check-in system or not, make sure that you have some kind of a system, whether it's stickers or a piece of tape or whatever it is, for identifying allergies on a per-child basis.
Absolutely.
So, and I know, Angela, you have kids that have some medical or some food allergies, and this is really a big deal for you guys.
Absolutely. My kids are sort of unique in that we do deal with a lot of really severe food allergies, and so being able to have something that identifies what each allergy is really helpful, especially as volunteers come in and out. Yeah. They may not know that, if this little girl gets wheat, she goes into anaphylactic shock.
Right.
And so it's always important, and it's really important to me as a mom, leaving my children within the ministry, that they do have something that's clearly outlined on their badge of this child has an allergy and here's what it is, so that, everyone knows what not to give them.
And it's important to communicate that back out to the parents as well. So if you're serving a snack, get a little dry erase board, put what the snack is on the wall, so that as the parents are dropping their kids off, they can see that, and then they can also do a verbal alert. Hey, this child can't have animal crackers because of, and then kind of fill in the blank.
And I love that suggestion, because it's so it's one of the things we forget to ask on a busy Sunday morning is, what are you serving today? We even go so far as we pack our own snacks for nursery and for children's ministry, just so that there's not any confusion on it. But I also have seen other churches have gone even so far as to remove paints and Play-Doh and things that have actual allergens in them and provide alternatives. Yeah. Because anymore, every child is different with their reaction. You have to kind of go a little bit further in protecting them from whatever it is that they're going to react to.
And it's just amazing to see how that has all changed over the the course of decades. I mean, when I was a kid, there was no problem, right? Like everybody ate the glue.
We ate everything. Yeah, it was no big deal.
But it's amazing to see how people's immune systems and things have physically changed. So
and training people to be able to identify those reactions. I think you shared a story once about a little girl in your children's ministry,
Mm-hmm.
and people not understanding what those reactions look like. I mean, if the child has nothing to identify that, they're not going to really know that that's a reaction.
Yeah, we had the granddaughter of our senior pastor was given a peanut butter cookie, and she went into anaphylactic shock and almost died. It was a very touchy situation. But as a children's pastor, we think we know everybody who's involved, all the kids and all the parents.
Right.
And oftentimes we can't know all the details that's back there. So it's important to have some system of identifying those kids and making sure that they're, again, well taken care of.
And some places even go so far as to have nut-free zones or whatever it might be in order to protect the children. And as a parent to a child with allergies, that's always appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things to kind of keep in mind as well from a medical emergency standpoint. Make sure that you have a system in place to identify and document any kind of incident that comes up. So the photos of my son, those were actually the part of our documentation process of, like, here's what happened, here's what's going on. And that's just, again, to protect the church more than anything else. So if there was ever a question that came up about, hey, what happened, and you've got some good documentation put in there. So, and make sure, again, that you've got photos of all of those things as well. So if you don't have that, again, if you're looking for a check-in system, KidCheck has got a great way of handling all that. You can put in notes and upload photos and everything, so you've got that captured in perpetuity.
Really important.
Make sure that if you're doing any kind of a longer-term system, so maybe like a vacation Bible school thing or a camp, make sure that you get medical releases from the parents. And that's just really, really important. Because if there was a problem with the child was in your care and you needed to take them to a higher level of care, you want to make sure the child can get treated right away. So one thing that we recommend is look at a system that can provide those, or that you can upload and have those online. That way you don't have to think about having like a portable filing cabinet full of those medical releases. Like a lot of churches will do that. They'll put all the medical releases in a portable filing cabinet. If there's an incident, they have to grab the whole case and take it with them. Then they can find the paperwork when they get to church. If you have everything online, and you have an incident that happens and you get the child to the hospital and get them starting treatment, you can actually jump online on one of the hospital computers and just pull up the medical release right there. So it's one less thing to think about in an emergency, which is really cool.
I really like that aspect of being able to manage those medical releases digitally or electronically versus having to carry your whole case.
Absolutely.
That's kind of a pain.
And then lastly, make sure that you've got your volunteers and the security team trained in CPR. And this is generally a pretty easy thing. A lot of times as a church grows, you'll have somebody in the congregation of the church that's a certified CPR trainer. We had several at our church, and we would do our monthly meetings, and probably at least once a year, maybe twice a year, we would have the CPR person come in and just kind of refresh everybody's minds in terms of how to do it. And get those that have never taken CPR certified and up to speed. So again, it's a pretty simple thing to do to kind of get your volunteers in place. And it was always kind of fun because we would do the children's ministry volunteers and the security team all at the same time. So it was kind of a big group activity, and it just became a lot of fun. It was kind of joking around and having fun, but everybody knew exactly what to do when if there was an emergency that required that.
The training is a huge key.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right, so let's talk about emergency planning. So when we're talking about emergencies, we're talking about things like, natural disasters, so fire, flood, earthquake, whatever it may be.
Hurricane.
One thing to keep in mind is that the absolute worst time to plan for an emergency is while the emergency is happening. Yeah, this is what most of us do. We just don't want to think about it, or it just becomes too cumbersome to think about. And so we put it off, and then it becomes too late. This is something that you really want to do with the security team in mind. So having kind of a cohesive plan that says, okay, if there's a fire in the building, what are we going to do? Where are we going to take the kids? How are we going to maintain security? How do we keep them safe? While this emergency is actually going on. And in fact, one thing that I had this actually came from another church, but this was a fantastic suggestion. What they did was they sat down with their security team and the children's ministry volunteers, and they planned out kind of like every scenario that they wanted to have kind of an orchestrated plan for. And then they made little flip books, and if you could think of, maybe each page is like the size of maybe a Post-it note. but they had like little tabs across the bottom that just said, fire, earthquake, whatever the the scenario was. And that was posted on the inside of every single children's ministry classroom, so that the volunteer that was in the children's ministry, if there was suddenly the smoke detectors all go off, they could just go right to the door, they flip open the fire page, and then it just had, okay, here's the 4 steps that you need to go do.
I think that's brilliant.
It was great, because everybody's kind of panicking. The smoke detectors are going off. I've got 10 kids. What do I do? You're not thinking about, oh, hey, I was trained on this 4 months ago. It's right there on the door. So you flip that open, and you go, oh, hey, I need to, okay, we're going to get them together. We're going to have everybody hold hands. We're going to get them out this door and kind of follow the plan.
It's just so helpful, especially in an emergency scenario where, like you said, sometimes we panic because we've got little ones to look after.
Absolutely.
And so I just love that idea. I think that is so smart.
But you want to make sure that you're thinking through not only sort of the natural disaster standpoint, but also like, okay, what about a medical emergency? How do we move the victim? How do we call paramedics? What does that look like? As well as security emergencies. If you have an angry parent that shows up, or some kind of a custody battle that all of a sudden you're standing in the middle of, okay, who's going to come to my rescue? Who's going to help me out? How do we diffuse the situation? Knowing what to do before it happens is absolutely critical.
Important.
So this was, I just wanted to share this one slide. This is actually the church that I was on the security team with. The church is called The Pursuit. And this was kind of some of our emergency planning. This is specifically what do we do in case of a fire or a flood or some kind of a natural disaster. Sometimes you have to think beyond what your local facilities look like. So the building that we're in, we're actually in half of this building. But you notice the parking lot around the building is actually pretty small. It's an old industrial kind of a warehouse sort of a building. So parking wasn't a huge idea when this was built. So the thought was, what do we do if there's a fire, if the smoke detectors go off? How do we get the kids to someplace safe? And the thought was, well, if you look just south of the building, this big white roofed building at the bottom of the picture, that's actually our local YMCA. And they have these wonderful tennis courts. So what the plan was, we went over to the YMCA and we said, hey, can part of our planning be that if there's a fire that we can take the kids and kind of corral them on your tennis courts. The tennis courts have 10-foot high chain link fences all the way around with 4 entrances. We can actually use KidCheck on a tablet just to do normal checkout. We just take the whole system with us basically. And it was very, very easy to get the kids over there in about 2 minutes. So the YMCA said, sure, that sounds great, and that became kind of our overall plan. But we could maintain security. We could keep a close eye on the kids. There's not a lot for them to hurt themselves on the playground or on the tennis courts. And then the fire trucks can roll up and take care of the fire and do whatever.
Well, and I like that example because it also speaks once again to knowing your local resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I like when you mentioned thinking sort of outside of your organization or the building that you're in and looking at what's around you that you may be able to utilize for an emergency situation.
Yeah, sometimes the best plans, you have to be a little creative to kind of get to the right answer.
I like that. I think it's really creative.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about volunteer policies. And this is, volunteers are a challenge always in children's ministry. I know that we're always shorthanded with folks. It's hard to get folks pulled over and plugged in. And we're always so excited when somebody does raise their hand and say, yeah, I want to go, I want to hear kids recite Bible verses and do the flannel graph.
I love the flannel graph.
But there are definitely some things that you need to keep in mind to put in place in terms of volunteer policies to make sure that you've got not only the right volunteer in the right spot, but somebody that's going to be there for a long time, somebody that is solid and ready to go. So the first thing that you want to make sure that is part of your policy for new volunteers is you always, always, always want to run a background check on a volunteer. And there are, this is so easy to do now. You used to have to go down to the FBI office locally and get them fingerprinted and all that kind of stuff. Now you can pretty much do it all online. But there are definitely some good ways and some better ways to do background checks. A lot of the online facilities and online background check processors will do like a statewide background check as well as a federal background check on a given volunteer. But not every state reports information the same way. Sometimes they don't report it to the state level if they have a conviction or something in their background that you need to be aware of. Sometimes they report it at the local level or the county level. And so whatever service you're using for doing background checks, it's important to know, hey, in my area, do they understand, where is the right way to go get the information? Where's the right place to go get information? So make sure you kind of check that out ahead of time. And then as you're going on, you want to make sure that you do periodic background checks on everybody. And we typically recommend between 12 and 24 months. And that's just because you're dealing with state agencies and federal agencies, and sometimes it just takes a long time for things in somebody's background to kind of bubble up into the full report. So if you have somebody has a conviction or a felony on their background, it may take 6 months, 8 months, 12 months before that actually shows up kind of in a public search form. So it's just a good thing to do. It's a good policy to have. It's not very expensive. In fact, it's probably some of the cheapest insurance that your church could buy. So.
And we do hear that. I mean, we do hear that from a lot of children's ministry directors, that I just don't have it in my budget to do background checks.
Yeah.
But I think, as you've mentioned in the past, that you really can't afford not.
Yeah,
to
I don't think you don't
checks.
have it in your budget.
Yeah,
you
just have to find it.
So definitely. And there are some ways, sometimes the services online can be $15 or $20 per background check, and there's certainly less expensive ones as well. There's some that are $8 and $10. So. And
you've even mentioned in the past that having people pay for their background check is
absolutely.
Also an option, which I thought that's a pretty reasonable request.
Yeah,
if I want
absolutely.
to participate in children's ministry, I should be able to pay the $8 to $10 to do my background check. I thought that was great.
Yeah, and that it just shows people's commitment if they're willing to do that as well. They're they're fully in. They're willing to do this. Every couple of years, it's a couple. It's 2 soy lattes at Starbucks, right? So it's pretty inexpensive.
That's great.
So. So one thing that we want to do, and again, this is a hard temptation to fight, but you want to make sure that you institute a mandatory waiting period for new volunteers.
And that's hard to do.
It is hard to do because somebody goes, "Hey, I'm in. I want to volunteer," and we get all excited. We're like, "Great, let's go!" But you really want to make sure that you've got some level of time, whether it's 60 days or whatever makes sense for your church, 2 or 3 months. It gives you an opportunity to kind of observe that person in normal church social setting. You can ask some questions on there. It gives you an opportunity to, hey, if you're feeling kind of the spirit moving, like, hey, this is something not quite right here, it gives you an opportunity to kind of flesh that out a little bit. But it, again, is a really good way to just kind of ensure that person is the right person.
Well, and they can still go through training as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So they can, go through children's ministry, onboarding and CPR training and all that stuff. So when the waiting period's over, they're ready to go.
Right, absolutely.
But it's giving you an opportunity to observe them, to get to know them, and possibly, just get a little bit more information on them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So another thing that we always recommend as well is a policy that we call the rule of twos. And this can be a little confusing at times, but it's a really important thing to do. And the rule of twos is very simple. It is just that you never want to have fewer than 2 children and 2 adults together at any given time. And again, that is increasing that visibility. It's increasing accountability and reducing that isolation. So if you have kids that you need to move to the restroom, make sure that you've got 2 adults and two kids as the minimum group. Call up your security team. Hey, can we get somebody over to help get kids to the restroom, if you will? It just, again, you want to make sure you have a lot of eyes on this. One question we get a lot as well is, hey, if I only have 1 child checked into, like, my first grade classroom, what do I do then? Well, I would recommend, you can combine classrooms for a couple of minutes until you have more kids checked in, and then split them up. And same thing if you don't have enough volunteers, just try and group people together if you can. But just for good practice and a great policy is just instituting that rule of twos, making sure 2 children and 2 adults at any time.
That's great.
So we've also got a couple of additional resources down here at the bottom, really good things to kind of check out. So stopitnow.com is an online site that just has a lot of child abuse prevention tips and tricks and policy ideas and that kind of thing. Also, you've got our blog at KidCheck.com. Angela does a fantastic job of putting lots of detail and lots of information to some of these bullet points that you're seeing today. So go check that out. It's definitely well worth it. And then Angela, also, you're a certified trainer for Darkness to Light.
Yeah, so I do facilitation for them for organizations on abuse prevention.
So Angela also does our child abuse policy seminar.
Yeah, the child protection policy is, we do another webinar on that as well. And that's a big topic.
Yeah, it's loaded.
That policy manual, writing that is always a big topic, but it's certainly doable.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're looking for more information on what types of policies to have in place and how to get this into a written church-wide policy, just some great resources to go look at. I definitely encourage you to check out the next child protection policy webinar.
Yeah,
so,
that's a good
for
one.
sure. Okay.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about predator profiling today. And this is a really big topic, and I can't obviously cover everything within the few minutes that I have. But one thing I wanted to share with you before we start talking about this topic is some of the false assumptions. And you know, oftentimes we hear within a lot of churches the mentality of it couldn't happen here. There's just no way that we have predators amongst us or in our pews. It just doesn't happen here. And so I wanted to share with you some of the false assumptions that we run into quite often. And that first one is, as I've mentioned, abuse will never happen in our church. It only happens in places like, and you can insert the descriptor. And some of these false assumptions are just for lack of knowledge. And, you know, abuse really happens when we're just sort of, we don't really know what's going on. And so I just want to share these with you so that if you find yourself having some of these mindsets, that you may want to just rethink your position a little bit, or possibly recommend to somebody else that they should rethink their position too. The second one is, I know people in our church. They're friends, family. This is our community. We've been around them our entire lives. And it's always important to point out that, you know, you can know about people, but not really know people. And so keeping that in mind when that specific assumption arises. The third one is, our church or facility, we're safe. You know, why would somebody target us? Churches, time and time again, have proved to be huge targets. And the reason being is because there are several things. One, anytime you have a concentration of children in one area, you're going to tend to attract predators. The other thing, too, is that churches tend to have a more redemptive nature. We want to believe the best in everyone. And so, you know, predators find that attractive because they know that, you know, people are going to look at them differently. They're going to give them an opportunity, whether or not those people know they're safe or not. And so that's the third assumption. The fourth one is always interesting, and that is predators are monsters. I would know one if I see one. And this one is really challenging because there's no one-size-fits-all look to a predator, as we'll see in a slide moving forward. But it's just really important that we keep in mind that predators are chameleons, and they tend to, you know, really integrate well into their communities, and there's just no one-size-fits-all. You have to really, and I always tell people, I know this is difficult, but you really do have God on your side. And I really feel like this is a place where the Holy Spirit can oftentimes reveal something to a children's ministry director that they normally would never see with just our regular eyes. I've oftentimes heard ministry directors say, you know, I had a feeling, or something just was laid on my heart about this person, and I really truly believe that, of course, is the Spirit moving, and you've got those tools available to you and that help, and you should really use that.
Yeah,
really
don't
utilize that. Don't ever ignore that, because there's always signs. So moving on to the next slide. Let's talk about some of the profiles. So there are two profiles that I'm going to highlight today. There's a lot of research, hundreds of hours of research behind this, but I wanted to boil down the most important points for you regarding this topic. So the first predator is a power predator, and really you hear a lot of these tragedies in the news media. These are situations where a child or another person is taken by force. I think one of the most popular examples in times past has been the J.C. Duggard situation, where she was literally tasered and thrown in the back of a car, and, you know, she was a child. And so that's really sort of that's the picture of a power predator. And they're really less of a focus for churches because there are so many eyes around. So they really don't act, and they really do only strike when they know they can prevail. or in situations where it's not easy for them to retreat. So that's sort of the first one. The second one is really where I want to focus my time, and that is on a persuasive predator. And the reason the persuasive predators are so deadly to churches is because they do integrate very easily into the church communities. They're oftentimes people who have significant charm and charisma and great personalities, and so they're least, they're oftentimes not suspected. I mean,
they look like everybody else.
Exactly. And they're warm and open and friendly. And then the other thing with persuasive predators is that they work tirelessly to gain trust and to groom victims, but not only victims, but entire families. And one thing in the research that I found that was really interesting to me was I thought that there was really an instant gratification piece, that persuasive predators would come in, they would establish themselves, and then they would strike. What I found in the research was that some predators will wait up to 3, sometimes 5 years to gain more trust, to break down more barriers, and to have access to more victims. And so there really is a, sort of a long-term predetermined strategy that goes on with a lot of these situations, which can be very frightening. And then, example, as you can see on the slide, you can picture sort of a wolf in sheep's clothing is really how I would picture the persuasive predator. So looking at some of the characteristics, now there are lots and lots of characteristics that you can attach to a persuasive predator, but one of the ones that I wanted to highlight are the ones that we are less suspect of, or ones that we often find or want in volunteers. So I've highlighted a few, and once again, going back to my statement of there's no one size fits all. Predators can be educated, uneducated. They can come from all different sorts of backgrounds. The other thing is that they're extremely opportunistic. They look at churches because they find that there's more opportunity there. There was one gentleman that I read an interview with who had been an 8-time convicted predator. He was highly educated, had a music degree, and when he would get out of prison, he would go to his whatever church was closest, and he would share that he would like to start a children's choir. And he said, time and time again, churches were so excited that I was there to start a children's choir. They never once asked me for an application to be filled out, for personal or professional references. They never asked me to do a background check. They were so excited that I wanted to do this that they gave me access to hundreds of children within days. That's the kind of opportunistic behaviors that we see in persuasive predators, and something to keep in mind. The other thing is they're highly intelligent. They really do, they understand the inner workings of children and how they interact and what happens to a child if they're in vulnerable situations or if they're often ignored or whatever's going on. They're very, very intelligent and calculated. The last thing is big risk takers. Risk really feeds the fire. They feel like the more time that goes on with grooming and children and families, the greater the risk. And this really does motivate them in a lot of instances. The last thing is intuitive. They're highly intuitive. And in this same interview, it was interesting. This one predator was asked, how do you choose your victims? And he responded that within less than 1 minute, he could be in a room full of children and he would know exactly who his victims would be based on body language, where the child was, were they involved in the activities, were they out on the periphery, was there something that indicated that they were isolating themselves from the other children. There were so many things that he highlighted, that he looked at, that he scanned the room for, and within less than a minute he knew exactly who would accept his affection and who would not. And so that intuitive piece is something that children's ministry directors really need to be aware of.
And looking at your list here, Angela, I mean, a lot of these different traits of the persuasive predator. I mean, this looks like the ultimate volunteer. This is like exactly the person that I would want to have in my children's ministry, and so it's just kind of scary.
And once again, I always go back to, you really need to utilize the gifts of the Spirit to be able to discern what is true and what is not.
Yeah.
You know, and really having that ability to be able to see things that you normally would never see. Mm-hmm. So yes, those are the top characteristics that I like to highlight. And then this next slide is really, I want to drive the point home of what we perceive to be the predator's look when we're interacting with them. So for just a moment, I'd like to take a look at this slide. And obviously, there's one in the top right-hand corner that we know has been convicted and has gone to jail for, you know, child molestation. But look at these people and think to yourself, who would you think would be a predator and who would not? And then we show you that they're all convicted predators. You have a teacher, you have a beauty queen, you have a film director, you have a college professor at an Ivy League school. You have, there's just not one size fits all.
Right.
And so breaking down that assumption of what they should look like is really important to being able to open yourself up to seeing things a little bit differently. And then, you know, how do they work? This is a question that we get asked a lot. And, you know, there are different ways that they work, but these were the 10 things that I really wanted to highlight. We've already talked about the fact that they infiltrate communities very easily. They work to remove the barriers and to build up trust within families and children. We know this because once families and children are being groomed, their guards drop. They look at that person, they go, you know, I feel safe with them around my children, or within my family.
Kind of the subtle feelings that are
exactly. Or, you know, why is this person paying specific attention to this one child? Why are they bringing them gifts? Why are they singling them out? Why are they, you know, you just sort of put that away in the back of your mind, and that's what they want. They want us to drop those barriers. You know, begin the process of grooming. It takes literally just moments for them to start a conversation with the child and to figure out the best way and strategy of how to work themselves into that child's life. Next, they go and they start with innocent behaviors. It may be a touch on the arm. It may be a side hug. It may be, you know, just laughing and joking and talking and, you know, very innocent behaviors that nobody would think twice about. But then they watch as the child becomes more comfortable with advances or with more touching or things like that. And then they transition into more risky behaviors. These behaviors can be references or showing children pornography, whether it's a video or whether it's a magazine or something, or a dirty joke or a crass comment or something like that. Those risky behaviors start to indicate what the child will accept and what they will not accept. And that's when you start to see an increasing level of sexuality introduced, and then usually the abuse occurs because the child feels like they've already been exposed to some of these behaviors from the person, whether it's, you know, the risky behaviors, I mean. And so
this process is a very methodical process that that predator would go through over the course of years.
And that's the thing about this process, is that it's very predetermined. You know, they have a list of steps that they go through in their minds to get access and then to ultimately abuse. And then the last thing is protecting against them. And, you know, we've highlighted the importance of a child protection policy. That's probably, you know, one of the most important things. And, you know, oftentimes people will respond, what do you mean a policy will help prevent? Well, a policy in this aspect should be a living, breathing training document where everybody's aware of. It just eliminates the gray area for interacting with children. And so it's just really important. Education is huge. We've already talked about having a check-in and check-out process. And really that, whether you're using an electronic solution like KidCheck that captures all the information and really builds a profile and picture of this child, or using pen and paper, having something that prevents a child from being handed over to somebody that shouldn't have access to them is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, being aware, we've talked about paying attention to the most vulnerable. And oftentimes that can be children who are going through a family divorce or a death in the family or bullying at school or something that's going on. Those really are the most vulnerable. And oftentimes we find those children tend to act out more. And so the tendency is to maybe remove them from the activities and things like that. That's the last thing that you want to do, is you want to try to incorporate more of those vulnerable children within the others, because you do protect them. Taking comments, feedback, and observations seriously that children make. I can't stress this enough. Children are very smart and they understand people very well. And they may not say something, but they may indicate something, whether, so paying attention to that. Once again, predators count on privacy, removing the points of isolation, decreasing that ability for someone to be alone with a child is very important. Creating visibility, and once again, utilizing your resources. And these are all really good steps in helping prevent. And even if you choose to do a few of these, you'll probably detour a lot of unwanted and nefarious behavior that people bring into your ministry. So, if predators know that there's a process and a plan behind it, and that as a ministry director you're committed to security and safety, they're going to be less apt to think that they can offend.
Yeah, absolutely. In every step, it's that same, increasing that visibility and accountability and reducing isolation.
Absolutely.
Across the board. So let's talk about sort of the overall keys to children's ministry security and creating that safe environment. So one of the things that you want to make sure that you absolutely do is you're kind of going through your policies and procedures that you want to establish within your children's ministry. You can't make exceptions. Right. No matter how well you even know that parent, you have to kind of think of these as, hey, these are the rules, and we have to stick with them, because as soon as you make exceptions to the rules, they're no longer the rules anymore. Correct. So you want to make sure that you're never leaving a child alone with an adult. You want to make sure that you've got that instituted rule of twos across the board. And don't be afraid to say no, because ultimately you are responsible for that child's safety and security, not the parent that's making the big stink at the door, or whatever's going on. When that child is in your custody and in your charge, you're in charge. So make sure that you give yourself permission to say no, and have a plan in place to say, okay, when I do have that parent that is upset, or something else is going on and they're taking it out on me, what is my process to handle that? Hey, get on the radio, call the security team, whatever those steps look like.
That buffer again, which the security team can provide.
Make sure that you've got great attendance records that you can kind of pull back up over time and see what was going on, in case there was any kind of a situation that comes up, or any allegations or anything weird, that you've got great records of what's going on. Make sure that you're not leaving children unattended before or after the program. And this is kind of a big one. We all tend to want to, okay, the pastor's kids, they're here early, so we'll go ahead and let them check in half an hour early and just have the one adult in the room, or whatever it is. It's okay to have those policies in place. It says, no, children's ministry opens 10 minutes before the service, and we're done 10 minutes after. And if you need to call the security team over to say, hey, we got to go find Nancy Smith and these three parents to go pick up their kids, get more folks to kind of help you do that, because again, you want to make sure you've got those policies in place. But lastly, just use common sense and just be safe. Absolutely.
And if anybody has any questions, please put them into the questions area. I think that Alyssa's going to let us know if there's any outstanding questions or anything that you need more detail on. You can also find these slides and our new Improving Child Safety videos series if you go to kidcheck.com/KidCheck. What is that little hyphen slides? Thank you. A dash slides. Everything is also out there as well. But if you do have questions, we'd love to answer them, and we're here. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have any other questions afterward as well, you can always this is my direct email. Hit us on the website, give us a call. If you want to see how KidCheck works, we're happy to do that as well. So,
yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for attending and giving us your time.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
All right. Well. Thanks, you two. This is fantastic. We're really thrilled about it, and it's a lot of useful and powerful information here for you. So thank you so much for sharing and imparting all of that. It looks like there might be some questions that have come in here. I don't know if you wanted to address those or not. It looks like there's a question about Rule 2. Oh, maybe it's just more of a comment. Maybe I'm misunderstanding that. I just want to make sure we don't cut things off before the event, before folks have gotten their questions answered.
Yeah, and we're happy to stay and answer questions, as many as we've got. So
absolutely.
Unfortunately, we can't see the questions.
Yeah, we can't see them.
So if you want to read them, we'll.
Yeah.
Let me take a look here. Well, lots of thank yous and compliments on there. Very nice. Thank you. This is great. It says your rule of twos. We have limited human resources and have a rule of 2 versus 1, I'm assuming, so no one is ever alone with an adult. Can you speak more to this? That's a question from Jerry.
Yeah, I think if you have a smaller group and you've only got a couple of adults, I mean, the easiest thing to do to kind of continue to hold on to that rule of 2s, and that's just a really important baseline rule. But just combine classrooms, combine kids, combine adults until you've got at least 2 adults and at least 2 kids. And especially when you're moving children as well, like going to the restroom, because that is a potential area of isolation. So even if Johnny has to go to the restroom, maybe you pick Joey next to him and say, hey Joey, would you mind going with Johnny, even though Joey doesn't have to go. And then you can get on the radio and call your security team, one of your security team folks over to kind of escort the kids. So there's 1 adult and 2 kids, and then get another children's ministry volunteer to help take them if you can.
It's also important too to make sure that you let parents know that they need to take their children to the restroom before they bring them into the classroom.
Absolutely.
I know that has often helped a lot with the bathroom situations when you don't have a lot of volunteers, is making sure that those kids use the restrooms before they come into the ministry.
Yeah.
So another question came in from Jennifer asking, what type of background check do you recommend?
Yeah, there's a couple of different types of background checks you can do. Like if you go down to your local like FBI office, typically if you live in a city that's got one, they can do a national background check for you if you want to do something local like that. But typically what I recommend is using an online service. There's several of them out there that are really good. There's one that's integrated into KidCheck, so you can actually tie that all together as well.
And that's Protect My Ministry.
That's Protect My Ministry. And Protect My Ministry, they do the national background search. They check all of the registered sex offender lists. And then they also have a very good system, so they know, hey, if you're in a city that, or in an area that the information is reported to the city level or the local level or the county level or the state level, they know which is the right place to go look for that information. So just looking for something that kind of covers both the federal as well as the local is pretty important.
I think that's really good to highlight that, because a lot of the information is extremely fragmented. So finding an online service that brings all of that together, aggregates it from local up to national level, is really helpful and really important, because it's not often that they'll miss a red flag because of the way that they do that. But making sure that they have that scope of going national is, as Alex said, really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would certainly seem to make sense, from me as an outsider perspective, that you want to try to fill as many of the gaps and holes as possible. That makes so much sense. Yeah.
And you can save yourself a little money if you want to go, if hey, here's the right place locally to go. Like if I need to go to the county, I can go, request information from the county courthouse. But A, it's a lot of work, and B, there's no real way of aggregating that information together in a concise way. So having a service do it saves you time and money and provides you the cleanest level of information.
Great answer. So another question is, we are about to do some training for an active shooter, which suggests we should paint windows over, but that goes against decreasing isolation. What to do?
So, active shooter scenarios. This is something that again, you're definitely going to work your security team into this. Obviously, painting windows over to help reduce visibility from an active shooter standpoint. That works okay in areas where like if you have big windows along the side of your sanctuary and somebody's just looking to engage and open fire into a crowd of people. What I wouldn't recommend doing is painting over windows between on the inside of the building between your children's ministry classrooms and maybe the hallway that's in front of them. So there's ways you can kind of reduce the active shooter scenario, but still maintain that visibility within your children's ministry area. And I think if you're having to kind of make trade-offs between those two scenarios, specifically in your children's ministry, the children's ministry from a targeted standpoint, from a predator standpoint, is going to be targeted much more frequently than say the active shooter scenario. So I think people, we tend to get very excited about active shooter and want to make sure that we've got all these things in place to protect what's going on, even though the risks are actually very, very low compared to the risks of a predator being able to kind of walk into church and start targeting kids in children's ministry. So just again, use common sense on that. And sometimes we have to make trade-offs, but you need to ask, okay, where's my biggest threat? Where's that threat coming from, and how do I appropriately respond to that?
Okay, good. Another question. How do you deal with someone who is mentally ill in the church environment?
Gosh, we did this several times at the Pursuit, where if somebody was coming to church that was mentally ill, it depends on, again, like the severity of the illness, but oftentimes we would have somebody that would come in and would want to go make a disturbance, in the hallway, the restroom, sometimes in the sanctuary. So we just, again, the security team, we have these people identified. If somebody saw them walking in the front door, they would just call out on the radio. We had codes for everything, just kind of like normal police operations. But we would always then have somebody on the security team that would sit in a close proximity to that individual. So, should they have an episode or start causing challenges, that security team person could go and escort them out. And sometimes people that are mentally ill, when they have those moments of lucidity, and you're sort of talking to them, they understand at some level that hey, my behavior isn't normal or acceptable. So you can almost sort of talk them through, hey, okay, if this happens, here's how we're going to respond. So it's not a shock, it's not a surprise to them. They may still thrash around, they may still want to cause a scene, but when it's all over, again, we want to protect their spiritual aspect as well, right? They don't want to feel attacked in the church.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to ridicule or attack them. Certainly, that makes complete sense.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it also poses the question of what does your executive or lead pastor feel about that? Because within my church, our pastor, we had several scenarios with mentally ill people coming in, and he was always he always gave the directive of, do not prevent them from coming to me. Whether they're hopping up on stage or whether they're causing a disturbance and they want to get to me, I will address them. I will take, and he was very adamant about that, but he was also very skilled at dealing with those types of people. And so there was never a time when the security would intervene unless there was a weapon or some other, danger was involved in that. But then there are some pastors that are like, you know what, let's just remove them from the sanctuary as quietly as possible and we can deal with it outside. So it really comes down to, what is your lead pastor comfortable with? How do they want the security team to interact? Is really their mantra to love, serve, and protect? If it is, then how do you respond to something like that? We also had an area where we had a mental illness ministry, and they would come in and they had a specific area where they sat, and there were monitored and things like that, and nobody really knew it was there except for the security team. So there are several ways you can deal with that in terms of managing them within the sanctuary as well as responding to incidents.
And one really important thing that I want to bring up as well. So this was kind of always a challenge. It was sort of a natural tension between our church staff, the senior pastor and the church staff, and the security team, because when there was an incident that would come up, the pastoral staff, they wanted to respond like you would expect a pastor to, out of love and compassion for this individual. The challenge was when and this happened a few times, but when we got into a scenario where all of a sudden the situation became a public safety situation,
yes.
and you're talking with, hey, we're a bunch of police officers and former police officers, and there's something that clicks in us that just goes, okay, it's game time,
right? And
we're going to go and handle the situation because somebody's going to get hurt if we don't. And it was really, really important to have that conversation between those two groups to say, okay, when somebody crosses the line, when it goes from, we can talk this person down, we can love this person, to, hey, they're smashing the bathroom up, The pastoral staff needs to understand it's time to step out of the way and let the team go and handle the situation.
That's a really good point, and I like how you present that there are different aspects of addressing based on the experience of a police officer versus a pastor.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's really important.
So
that's
Alyssa,
a great question from Holly. So anyway, I'm sorry, what were you saying? Alyssa was what?
Alyssa brought a question to us and said, through what age or grade do you recommend children be accompanied to the restroom?
That's going to really come down to every church is going to be slightly different in how they want to handle that in terms of escorting children. So I think you need to kind of look at where the restroom's at. Can the kids need to be escorted once they're in second grade, third grade? It's really going to be a question that you're going to need to discuss on an individual basis. So there's no one size fits all. It's no because every child is a little different. Every grade is a little different in terms of the maturity level and that kind of a thing. So would I let my 13-year-old go unescorted to the bathroom? Probably not, because I think he has like water balloon fights in the bathroom or something
Exactly.
like that. So, no, I'm just kidding. But there's something to kind of look at and say, like, all right, what's the maturity level of the kids in children's ministry? Where is it appropriate? And certainly just use common sense on that. Good question.
So that's it. That was the last question that I'm seeing coming in here. So these were all fantastic questions, and it was an absolutely amazing seminar, amazing webinar. Thank you so much for taking the time to do it with us.
Our pleasure.
I wanted to just I always like to give folks a few, an extra 20 or 30 seconds to type in a question. I don't want to have somebody, if they're typing in a lengthy question, to be overlooked here. But of course, as you've clearly put here on the screen, your contact information, you're available and happy to answer a question for folks at any time. I mean, that's why you're putting that up there, correct?
Yep, absolutely. That's what it's for.
And so yeah, okay, great. Well, I'm not seeing anything else coming in. It looks like folks are kind of diving out fairly quickly here. We did go a little bit longer than expected, but that's okay. And this is fantastic. So I can go ahead and end the webinar for everyone. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, and we hope that if any folks that are still here, if you haven't already registered for the shorter webinar event tomorrow on the actual KidCheck demo, that you'll please do so at our website. So is there anything else that you two would like to add in here at the end?
No, thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks everybody for all that you do, for children's ministry and just the work of the church, and really, really appreciate it.
And we're getting lots of thank yous in the comments and the questions there on that. So again, thank you both so very much for your knowledge and your expertise. So we really appreciate it. So, all right, well, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar for everybody then, and we will pick up at 1 p.m. tomorrow afternoon.
All right.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks all so much. Take care. Bye-bye.